just here to introduce our speaker today for part 2 of the Getting Started with Spinnaker session on enterprise rollout. This is Gopinath. He is the CTO at OpsMX. Please give him a warm welcome, and we'll have some comments or questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Gopinath Rebala, CTO of OpsMX. We founded in 2016. We specialize in Spinnaker delivery, enterprise rollouts, and we also have a continuous verification component. We have offices across the world, and we're about 60 people now. We contribute to open source Spinnaker. And this morning, my colleague went through installation of Spinnaker, creating a pipeline, and deploying it using Spinnaker. So today, now what we'll do is we'll take those pipelines, convert them into templates. For an enterprise, you want to be able to do self-service and provide these templates out to your developers and have them onboard their services themselves. Right, so we will look at that, and there are two models that you can use. You can use the pipeline templates-based pipelines that are created, or you could have the JSONs that centralized team can manage and sync with all the pipelines with Spinnaker with these pipelines definitions. So one thing that keeps coming up is also how are these permissions set, authorization models in Spinnaker. So we will go through a little bit on those authorization models and see how accounts versus applications, how are they segregated, how these permissions work. And we'll also do a little bit on deployment strategies and how the automated analysis can be used to improve your risk management of applications that you're deploying. So general Spinnaker workflow, Spinnaker is at the center here. As you can see, there is a CI part in the front, and then once the code is checked in, the Spinnaker can be kicked off, which can have the entire pipeline all the way from check-in to the deployment that's visible through the Spinnaker pipeline. And that's typically what you would like to see. Typically what you would have is a Jenkins doing the CI, which is building an artifact, pushing to some kind of artifact store. This is true for any of these cloud platforms that you see here. That's true for Kubernetes or AWS. It's just a slightly different way of using those artifacts in your deployment pipelines. Right? You could also have Spinnaker manage your infrastructure delivery through Terraform, or you can even integrate the Ansible kind of things. Today we'll focus on a simple pipeline, the conversion to into templates. Right? So it's typically, why do you need pipeline templates? Right? So there are best practices in your organization that you want to share. Every organization will have certain way of doing their workflow, some kind of a permission management, authorization policies that you want to set, and have certain requirements that if you're going to production, it needs to be SOX compliant, some policies that you want to set. All of these will go into your pipeline definitions. So you'd have some templates that define what your policies are for your enterprise and have them coded up. So typically you'll have a CI like we were discussing, and maybe a bake stage, and then deployment to dev or test stages. And then you would run some kind of a test. Could be automated, could be manual. And then you would have some kind of a judgment, whether you do a automated verification and then judgment, or just the judgment, manual judgment based on the test results that you have and the policies that you're following, and then you would promote. And this promotion then can follow certain deployment strategies. Right? So you can do a Canary deployment and then do a rolling update, or Canary deployment, blue-green update. And then based on verification, whether you can then roll back your changes. So one of the key things here is the failures do happen in production when you deploy. So you should be able to quickly recover from the failures. So which is where the Spinnaker provides you a easy rollback capability. This rollback depends a little bit on the cloud environment that you are deploying to, or the strategies that you are using to deploy. So how do we convert this into templates? Right? In Spinnaker, as you've seen this morning, the pipeline that you create from the UI, it's saved as JSON in the backend storage. And that JSON, each of these stages has a definition that goes into it. And usually in the definition, for applying to different types of services, you would have the environment that you are deploying to or the artifact that you are generating. Those are the ones that you have variables. So in this case, for example, in the Jenkins, you have the JSON that when you create a Jenkins job in Spinnaker, you'll have a definition that looks something like this. So the job name will be the one that the Jenkins job that the Spinnaker would run as part of that pipeline. Now, those are the kind of things you would convert them into variables. Right? So simply, you could replace that as a template variables.job. And when you create a pipeline based off of template, that is the one that gets replaced as a service that you want to run. So similarly for the deployment templates, so this again is a Kubernetes deployment. I removed part of the deployment definition there. But as you can see, you have the artifacts that you want to be specified as a variable, or you have the account that you are specifying as a variable. You can have multiple clusters or accounts that are decorated with certain namespaces that have permissions to certain groups. So you want to specify the account that you want to go to and the namespace. Those are the kind of things that you would make them into variables. Right? So how do we generate the template? There are a couple of different ways you can generate the template. The simplest one is from the UI, you create a pipeline. That's a typical pipeline that you are going to use. And then go and say, generate a template from it. So the Spinnaker would then give you the definition of that template. You can save it from the UI itself, or you can take that and then add your variables, update that to configure for your system, and then save that as a template. So this is one of the things that we will see how to generate the template from the pipeline that you have. So once the template is generated, you can create pipelines from the template. And typically the variables that you specify, if you're doing it from the UI, it would show something like configuration like that. It will give you all these variables where you can put in the values, and that becomes your pipeline definition from that point on. Right? You could also, all of this is supported by API. In an organization, generally you would be onboarding all your applications through API. So there is a tool called Spin that you can use to onboard that. So let's quickly see how that looks. Okay. So here we have the Spinnaker, a simple pipeline. Here, only thing it has is this configuration that's coming in and then the deployment. So here, we are deploying to one account and an Nginx, a certain version, and we are also creating service for it. Okay? So now we want to convert that this pipeline into a template and use that template to onboard newer services or deploying to different accounts. So if you see it as a JSON, this is how the configuration for that account will be. Here I have the definition for the deployment here in place, but typically you would get these from a remote location like Git. That will be an artifact-based deployment where you have the definition itself in the Git, which can itself be variable. So if you want to convert that, you'll go and say export that into a JSON, a template. What it's doing here is it's decorating it with a template ID and specifying the scope there. And the rest of it is a pipeline definition, same JSON that we saw before. Right? So
if you export that and then you say, look, base this off of something out of Git or Bitbucket or whatever you're showing, does that disable the ability to edit this now? You say that the source is coming from SCM, or can you still go in there and edit this JSON here?
You don't edit the JSON in the UI. What you would do is copy that, right? And then edit it from here. Right? So when I copied it, you can say so here you see that it's actually using this one, pipeline template to save. So that's essentially, this is the pipeline template definition itself. Right? So it doesn't look good here. Let me just.
I thought back on the other screen there was a save button on the bottom right. I thought that.
Yeah, it will save it, but there you don't have the ability to edit, to add variables to it.
Right.
But you can actually save it from there and create pipelines from it. So what you're asking is, like, let's say export pipeline template. So you see the name, it gave some rattlesnake name, and you could actually save it. Now, if you go to the templates, you see that the template is saved here. Now, you can use this template to create a pipeline. Let's say I want to go, let's say my app. And so what this one is doing is it does not have any variables. Right? So the exact same pipeline that we had before is what it's going to create. You see that? So it all has the same parameters. This is not something that we want as a template. Yeah.
Is there a way to make multiple pipelines reference the same template, such that, like, make an update to one template and all the pipelines that reference the update itself?
Absolutely, yes. So the template that we created here, so the pipeline we created here, is referencing that template. So when we go to the definition here, the entire pipeline definition now is only this much, right? Here, if you see that there is a reference, it actually is referencing the template. Now, if I go and edit the template and add an additional stage to it, this pipeline will reflect that. The other thing that you see here is that this template pipeline is not editable by end users. So if you want to have these as best practices that's given to your organization, they create pipelines from it, but you want those pipelines to be fixed, not editable, except for the parameters that you allow them to edit. This is one way to do it. So now that this one doesn't allow us to deploy to different environments or have different parameters to deploy, you would want to make this into something that has variables in it. Right? So let me format that a little. So now you will see that this is exactly what it came up. We can now go edit the name of it and then save this template with variables. I didn't want to do it here online, so I'll show you what I pre-edited. So I added a couple of variables here, one of them being the account, the other one is the target namespace. So I now created a couple of variables to this template that allow users who are creating pipelines from this template to give their own values. So I'll go and we can now go and change this and save it. Sorry, I don't want to type. So I'm going to save the pipeline template. And in here now, if we go and look into templates, So this is the new one that we just created. Right? So Kubernetes deployment demo, which has a couple of variables. Now if I want to create a pipeline from it, let's go do it in the same one. So it's giving me an option. Now when I'm creating the pipeline from it, I could go change it to use a different account, different target, say and so that account doesn't exist. So it tells me that that account doesn't exist, but in the definition, it has that values in it. Right? The same thing, usually what you want to do is have this available to developers in the templates. Now the template is in Spinnaker. So as a developers who are onboarding their own services, they will have a definition something like this. They will refer to the template and say, I want to create for this template, and my variable values are these. And simply by doing that, they'll say pipeline save. So we will see that new pipeline that got created from template that shows up, which has the variables that are specified by the developers that are onboarding this pipeline. And you can just go run that pipeline from here. So now we have these pipeline template-based pipelines where the templates are predefined. The IT or someone who's doing the best practices can add to the template, and all the pipelines that are derived from this template get those different stages from there. Right? So, yeah. So if you go to the details, you'll see the deployment. I haven't changed the deployment. It shows that. So that's one. And then the other way to do it is, so usually let's say the central enterprise, you want to control what pipelines or applications are onboarded. Right? So then you can have the repository of these JSONs, of these pipelines in central place and have the Spinnaker sync them. So for example, here we have the pipeline JSON definition. This, instead of using the pipeline templates, you could have these definitions stored somewhere in a Git and have them sync using the Spin. A simple way to do it is have a repository set up. Let's say, yeah. So here I have my repository. All the pipelines and applications that I see in this Spinnaker deployment are all synced with my Git. Right. So let's say I'm looking at a pipeline here in the deploy Nginx. I want to add some description to it. Right. And so I could go open that sorry. So essentially the idea here is that version to deploy, let's say I'll change the thing and then check it in, right? Oh, sorry. Now what we have done is have this pipeline definition stored in a remote repository and have the repository trigger a pipeline which would then go update the Spinnaker with the changes. Now, if you look at what we changed, this is a pipeline. Oops, sorry. which is in the application multi-cloud demo. And it is the pipeline that, with the name Kubernetes prod deploy. So if you go to application multi-cloud demo and then look at prod deploy, you'll see that it still hasn't updated. It takes a minute to update, but you can see that it gets updated. The way we do it is simply by having a git trigger and then use the Spin API, just look at the JSONs in that git repo and apply that changes to Spinnaker. So in that way, you can keep it all in sync with the JSONs. So these are two ways that you do it. One is you have the pipeline templates. You give self-service to your developers, and they onboard their pipelines using the templates. Or you have these JSONs that centrally managed. You push them into your Git that gets reflected onto the Spinnaker.
Question. Right now, are there any race conditions in Occur if you try and run those templates? Is there any potential for out of sync behavior to happen because you've got stuff happening in the back end to make a bit of sync?
Not really. So if you're asking if pipeline is already running, then you go and update while it is running. Are there any conditions that it will break?
Or I try and run a new pipeline now while there's stuff going on.
Yeah, so those are all synchronized, so you won't see that problem.
Okay, so it's all like sharp matched.
That's right.
Okay.
So the orchestrator takes the pipeline definition, it knows all the stages that are defined. It doesn't look for individual stages or tasks after it starts running. Right? So those are taken care of. So going back, so what we have seen is two things here. One is we went through the pipeline template creation. From the UI, take the definition, convert that into a template, add variables to it, and create a pipeline based on those variables. And so the template exists in the Spinnaker. The developers or whoever is onboarding those services would essentially be referencing that pipeline and add variables to it. The second one is you have the complete JSON of the pipeline that is defined, that you have it in the remote repository. Changes to those pipeline definitions will get reflected in Spinnaker through sync with the Git repo. Right? It's a command, so you'll use a Spin API to iterate through those JSONs and apply them. The other one that's interesting is with this permission models. So how does the permissions work in Spinnaker? Right? So it has this concept of accounts for target accounts where you're deploying to the cloud. So these accounts are essentially, in case of Kubernetes, you would have the namespaces and the cluster that you're associated with. And then let's say you're connected to LDAP. Then you can specify the groups that are allowed to write to it, allowed to read to it, or execute. So here the difference is that if in a DevOps kind of a scenario, operations doesn't want developers to operate on those accounts, but still want the ability to view what is deployed in that particular target namespace, the services they want to be able to debug. Then you would give those accounts just the read permissions. If we want to deploy, then you would give the ability to execute on those. And this applies to all target cloud environments. And the second one is the application permissions itself. So in the applications here, you give permissions on who can create pipelines within that application, who have the ability to read or view the pipeline executions or pipeline definitions, and who can execute those pipelines. And the last one is those pipelines themselves. Right? These pipelines can have permissions, the roles that they run with. You can define those roles under which they run. So when your incoming trigger comes in, you need to give it a context in which it runs. So let's say there's only ops group that has permissions to deploy to production, and dev has permissions to deploy to dev. This particular pipeline has both dev and ops. Then you would need at least dev permissions for that pipeline, the context, to run, to deploy to dev. And once that does that, you still need to elevate those privileges to ops to be able to deploy to a production environment. So these are the general permission structure within the Spinnaker. So now, for these accounts, usually we provide the ability using service accounts. So you'd have a service account that connects to a cluster, but then you define permissions on top for each of these dev or ops groups. Right? With the introduction of dynamic accounts in Spinnaker in 15, right? In 16 actually, 1.16, you can have more options in defining how these accounts are pulled and what service accounts they use. You can have flexible ways of setting it up. So for the permission configuration, you can set all these permissions, everything through the API. But in the UI, this is how it would look, setting permissions for each one of those applications. And so as we were discussing, you can have pipeline that has both dev deploy as well as production deploy. And you need some kind of a privilege escalation after the policy check. So that it provides this ability of saying that propagate authentication. And you can also, this is a new feature that we're adding where you could specify which are the groups that actually can execute this judgment. Previously, it used to be that production account, let's say it's guarded by operations. Anyone could give a manual judgment, but it would fail because they don't have the permissions with their authentication. And now with this, you propagate authentication, but you also restrict who can give the manual judgment to it, allow those services to go through for deployment. Sorry. So that's after this. Then now, how do you safe deployment strategies? So Spinnaker provides a red-black deployment strategy for AWS, GCP, and in the 1.16 that it's the red-black deployment, or the traffic management is introduced. With this traffic management, it manages the load balancer settings to the services automatically. So in your deployment manifest, but you could specify that you don't have to specify the service that it connects to, but you would say we would want to be service, let's say in this particular case, OpsMX multi-cloud prod service is the one that manages traffic to my service, to my deployment. One thing here is that it only supports replica sets, and it does not support the deployments for this traffic management. So your manifest needs to be deploying replica sets and not Kubernetes deployments. Part of the reason is because deployments automatically supports the rolling updates, and in the replica sets, you manage your own replica sets. What this is doing is this Spinnaker goes ahead and manages the service selectors for the replica sets that you're deploying. It will automatically enable the service selector for the service that's managing traffic for the new deployment after it's become stable, and automatically removes the service selectors from the prior deployment. So that way, after your replica set is stabilized, it automatically switches entire traffic to the new replica set. And here you have options to specify whether you want to keep the previous replica set around, how many versions of those replica sets you want to keep around, and if you want to keep the instances of those replica sets running. All those options are available, and then those are essentially used for ability to roll back. Right? Once you switch the traffic to new replica set, it's taking traffic, and you do your verification, you decide, no, this is not the right thing for me, I want to be able to switch. It allows you to switch back quickly. And these deployment strategies available with declarative on AWS, GCP. Right. So the next one is the Canary. With the Canary, it's more like you bring up partial set of instances in the new version. Now, you have production version running that has 4 instances. In the new version, you bring up partial set, like one instance. There are two ways here. One is if you have something like a Istio which can do partial traffic management, you can have a lot more fine-grained control. You could even bring up all your 4 instances of new version and then specify what amount of traffic you want to direct to the other one. If you don't have that, then you could be like instance level. So you bring up 25% of your instances and then have the traffic taken by the new instance along with the production one. And then you could do a verification on that one and say, yes, this Canary instance is good, and then you promote entire thing to production. At that point, you can do a blue-green promotion, the entire thing comes up, traffic switches to the newer version. You can do automated analysis. So Kayenta is a service that comes with Spinnaker. It supports multiple data sources. So in the production, if you're using Datadog, New Relic, Prometheus, any one of those data sources it can connect to. And you can specify which metrics you want to select as part of your Canary verification or automated verification. So it will do the verification on that and says if there is any significant difference in the new version that you're deploying compared to the old one. So it's in some cases you can even specify whether it's good or bad. For example, the lower latency in the new version that you're deploying, it could be significantly different. Let's say you're doing 200 milliseconds before, now it's only 100 milliseconds. It's different, but it's good, right? You can specify that it's good, and then it would allow you to pass that Canary. So if you have seen that, it looks something like this. The reports, you can specify which metrics you want to choose, and between the Canary and baseline, it would compare them. But it needs to be apples to apples kind of a comparison. So the underlying expectations here are there is the same amount of traffic that's going to the baseline and the Canary, and also that they're started around the same time. Usually you want to not use the instances of the baseline that's been running for a long time with the Canary instances that you bring up right now, because that usually have some differences in how the memory is utilized, caching is done, and how they respond to incoming requests. Right? So you want to have exact same thing. So one variation of this that we have done is also add logs to this analysis. For the logs, it's slightly different because it's not a performance-based one, but more of a functional. You can have the instance comparison that's done not exactly the same time they have to come up and not exactly the same traffic. The similar traffic is better, but it can do analysis on the functional logs over a period of time and identify if there are any new errors in it and highlight them. Maybe I can quickly show how that looks like. Yeah, so here is an analysis where we get a score based on both logs and metrics. Here it's identifying that in the logs there are a couple of errors that you can see, and it highlights the errors that you find in the logs. So these are the errors that you only see in the Canary version that you deployed, but not in the baseline. It essentially highlights those errors and allow you to share the report with the developers and quickly come to a resolution. If the errors are critical enough, because it has failed, you would want to roll back and deploy it after this has been fixed. So this also supports metrics. So that's a high level I wanted to cover today. If you have any specific things that you want me to cover, I can check. Otherwise, thank you for attending. And we have a booth outside OpsMX. You can visit us and see if you have any other questions.
Anybody have any questions? Yeah, I have one. So with the the blue-green deployments, right? As you mentioned, it's updating the service labels, right, to route the traffic. So the question is, we're currently deploying all of our queue resources for a particular deployment through Helm, right? Spinnaker supports Helm. So are you supposed to include your service deployment in your Helm chart when you're deploying your whole application, or is the service supposed to exist already so that Spinnaker can update the labels?
In this use case, it expects a Spinnaker service to exist when you're deploying this, the manifest that you're trying to do blue-green. You're specifying that this is a service I want in the definition itself. So it needs to know that the service exists before you deploy.
Okay, so you can't deploy your service within your deployment pretty much at the same time.
Yeah, you need to have it as a 2 stages. You deploy the service. You can have it in the same pipeline, but you cannot have it as the same stage. You deploy your service and then you deploy blue-green stage for your manifest.
Gotcha.
You can do that.
Is that how it's how you guys are currently doing it right now?
Yeah, that's how we're doing it. We're looking at ways to improve it. One of the things that we see is most people actually use deployments, right? Kubernetes kind for deploying, not replica sets. So we're also trying to see if it makes sense to do that, support that one also.
And then, just in general, what's your recommendation? Blue-green deployments provided by Spinnaker, or Spinnaker's regular rolling update with deployments strategy?
Well, blue-green updates are quite useful for switching the traffic very quickly. And particularly, we are going to be working on Istio. With those Istio service mesh enhancements, blue-green will become a lot more useful.
Okay.
With blue-green deployments, when you're routing to, say, some portion of your new code, when you try to make the determination about whether to go forward, is that usually always based on automated metrics, or is there any kind of like human aspect?
So the 2 aspects that we usually see, in the production, there's already a monitoring system set up, and they already have some thresholds that they set. Right? So that you combine with automated verification. So with the threshold, if it fails, let's say you have a threshold of 200 milliseconds set for the response time, and it's doing 300 milliseconds, now you quickly want to stop it. Those thresholds exist, but this automated analysis is more on a statistical distribution. It needs certain amount of data. It can also do large number of metrics which are not necessarily your SLA metrics. Basically, it gives you much more insight into what is going on to make automated decisions, even though your SLA is not failing. Right? So that's where the automated verification comes into picture.
So it's all based on like certain metrics, though, like SLAs and things like that. Not like, does this thing work the way I expect it to? Like function, it's not really functional based, right?
If you're purely looking at metrics, yeah, it is not functional. But if you combine that with logs, you get some functional out of it. But the metrics that automated verification is looking at are not just your SLA. Right? You could have a bunch of other metrics that are added to it, and you can give weights to them. It gives you a better picture of how the system is performing. In some cases, you could see that the utilization gradient for the memory is growing, but it's still within the limits. Your SLA is still being met, but you could predict that this is going to break. So those kind of things can be caught in the short statistical analysis saying these metrics look different, you should be taking a look at it.
So I'm just thinking in terms of like continuous deployment, like that sort of that
Right.
holy grail of like just moving stuff out to production. Like at what point, like where is the functional, how does the functional testing fit into that?
So the comparison is still not functional testing. I mean, you're just asking, as part of this pipeline, where does the testing fit in?
Code, like, is kind of doing what you want, other than SLA metrics,
Yeah, there is no replacement for testing. As part of the pipeline that you have, we generally put in test phase in there. only after the test is done, you would then promote it, right? So automated tests, yes, but for you to truly do complete CD, you would need a bunch of automated tests, and a lot of organizations are not there with full confidence with their automated tests. Then they do some manual tests, they run their automated test, and then run some manual tests, and then say, okay, now I promote to production.
So they'll kind of like maybe, take a pause in, say, a test environment, have some humans at it, and then they'll do a manual sort of release, and then they'll do like a Canary for like.
Yeah, once testing is done, then there's a certain amount of confidence in your software to push through. Then you would go run the automated analysis on top of it. So you would then do a Canary in production, do an automated analysis. If the score is good, you automatically promote, because there is some amount of testing already done. So it's not a replacement for test.
Hi. I was wondering, when you talk about so how are you doing a multi-cloud deployment, or is it just on? You mentioned STO, right? So STO is do you have any multi-cloud architecture within your setup right now, or is just focused to GCP?
Yes, multi-cloud is supported. We do multi-cloud with our customers. But then there are two different pieces, right? One is, can we deploy to GKE, OpenShift, EKS within the same Spinnaker configuration, different applications? Yes. Can we do the same application service deployment to two different clouds and then manage traffic through Istio? And no, we don't do that yet.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know if there's any current or planned support for Grafeus or simple signing or content trust?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if there's any current or planned support for Grafeus API?
Grafeus.
Or simple signing or content trust?
So there are discussions for the Grafeus, but no concrete plans yet. There is a roadmap published. I think there is some discussions on that.
How about like Notary or TAF, like content trust? Like just signing images? Do you know?
Yeah, it's not there in the roadmap yet. It's something that we'll definitely look at.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.